The room was quiet, except for the sound of traffic coming from far away. She sat on the edge of a small bed, holding a phone in her hands, staring at the screen without really seeing it. The message she was waiting for had not come. The landlord had already warned her twice. Rent was overdue. The fridge was almost empty. Every day felt heavier than the last. She had never imagined life would turn this hard. She had worked small jobs before, cleaning houses, helping in shops, doing whatever she could find. But work was not steady, and people like her were always the first to be let go. She did not complain much. She was used to pushing forward quietly, even when her chest felt tight with worry. That morning, she had gone to a small employment office near the bus stand. The place smelled of old paper and dust. A few people sat waiting, their faces tired and hopeful at the same time. When it was her turn, the woman behind the desk looked at her file for a long moment. "There is one job," the woman said slowly. "Babysitting, leave-in. Good pay. But the family is different." She did not ask many questions. Good pay was enough. Live-in meant she would not have to worry about rent for now. She nodded, even though her hands felt cold. By afternoon, she was standing in front of a tall gate made of black iron. The house behind it looked more like a palace than a home. The walls were high, the garden perfectly trimmed, the windows shining in the sunlight. For a moment, she wondered if there had been a mistake. People like her did not belong in places like this. A guard opened the gate and guided her inside. Every step felt unreal. The floor was smooth and clean. The air smelled fresh. Everything was quiet, almost too quiet. A housekeeper showed her into a large living room and asked her to wait. She sat stiffly on the edge of a soft sofa. Her eyes moved around the room. Expensive furniture. Large paintings. Yet something felt empty, like the house was missing a heartbeat. After a few minutes, a man entered the room. He was tall, dressed neatly, his face serious and unreadable. He did not smile. He simply looked at her, as if trying to understand who she was and why she was there. "This is about my child," he said calmly. "The job is simple. Take care of him. Follow the rules. No personal matters. No unnecessary questions." She nodded again. She was used to rules. She did not come here to cause trouble. The man called for the child. A small boy slowly walked into the room. He did not look up. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and his hands were clenched tightly. He stood near the door, silent. She felt something twist inside her chest. "This is him," the man said. "He doesn't talk much." She bent slightly and spoke gently. "Hello, I'm here to look after you." The boy did not answer. He just stared at the floor. That night, she was shown to a small room near the child's bedroom. It was clean and comfortable, more than she had expected. Still, she could not sleep easily. Her mind kept racing. What if she failed? What if she made a mistake and lost this chance? The next morning, she woke early and went to check on the boy. He was sitting on his bed, staring at a toy car without moving it. The room was filled with toys, but none looked loved. She sat a short distance away and said nothing at first. She remembered how people had always talked at her when she was younger, never to her. Slowly, she pushed a small ball toward him. It rolled gently and stopped near his feet. He looked at it, then at her, surprised. She smiled softly. "You can roll it back if you want." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, very slowly, he pushed the ball back. It was a small thing, but to her, it felt like a door opening. Over the next few days, she kept things simple. No pressure. No forcing smiles. She listened when he wanted silence. She spoke when he seemed curious. She helped him eat, helped him sleep, sat beside him when he woke from bad dreams. She noticed things others had missed. How he flinched at loud voices. How he looked toward the door whenever footsteps passed. How he hugged his pillow at night. The man watched from a distance. He noticed that his child was eating better, sleeping longer, crying less. One evening, he heard laughter coming from the child's room. It stopped him in his tracks. He stood there, unsure whether to enter or not. Inside, She was sitting on the floor, making silly faces, turning a simple story into something magical. The boy laughed, a clear, honest sound that had not filled the house in a long time. The man walked away quietly, something heavy pressing against his chest. That night, she sat alone in her room, thinking about the boy. She did not know why she cared so much. Maybe because she had once been a quiet child too, one who needed someone to notice. She did not know it yet. But the job she took to survive was already changing more than just her life, and this was only the beginning. The days slowly began to settle into a quiet routine. She woke up before the sun, prepared a simple breakfast, and waited for the small footsteps she was getting used to hearing. At first, the boy still kept his distance. He watched her carefully, as if afraid she might disappear like others had before. She did not rush him. She understood that trust takes time. She spoke to him gently, even when he did not reply. She told him small stories while tying his shoes or pouring his milk. Stories about ordinary things. Clouds that looked like animals. Roads that led to nowhere special. She wanted him to feel safe in simple moments. Little by little, he started to respond. Not with many words, but with actions. He would sit closer to her. He would bring his toys near where she was sitting. Once, when she stood up to leave the room, he quietly grabbed the edge of her sleeve. It was a small gesture, but it made her stop and look down at him. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. He did not answer, but he let go, as if her words were enough. The house no longer felt as cold as it had on her first day. It was still large and quiet, but there was movement now. Laughter came and went. Sometimes soft music played in the background. She did not change the house. She only changed how it felt. The boy's father noticed everything, even though he pretended not to. He noticed the child eating his meals without being forced. He noticed him sleeping through the night. He noticed how the boy waited near the door in the evenings, expecting her to come back if she had stepped out. At first, the man told himself it was temporary. He had hired many caretakers before. They all seemed helpful in the beginning, but something about this one felt different. She did not act impressed by his wealth. She did not ask questions about his work. She spoke to him plainly, with respect, but without fear. One evening, he found her in the kitchen, helping the boy wash his hands. Water splashed onto the floor, and the boy laughed loudly. The sound surprised him. He had not heard that laugh in years. She quickly apologized, worried she had done something wrong. "It's fine," he said after a pause. "I've just never heard him laugh like that." She looked at the boy, then back at his father. He just needed someone to listen. Those words stayed with him long after he walked away. As the weeks passed, she learned more about the child's world. She learned that his mother had been gone for a long time. She learned that his father worked late and came home tired, carrying stress he never spoke about. She saw how silence had slowly filled the spaces where warmth should have been. Sometimes, when the boy was asleep, she sat alone and wondered why life was so unfair. How some people had everything but still felt empty, while others had nothing but kept giving. The man started coming home earlier without realizing why. He found reasons to stay downstairs longer. Sometimes he joined them for dinner. At first the conversations were short and awkward, but the boy seemed happier when all three of them sat together, even if no one spoke much. One night, the power went out during a storm. The house fell into darkness. The boy panicked, clinging to her tightly. She held him close, humming softly, the same tune she remembered from her childhood. She did not even notice when the man came into the room. He stood there, watching, feeling something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Gratitude, regret, hope. After the lights came back on, the boy refused to let go of her. His father hesitated, then gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded, unsure what to say. From that night on, the man began to see her differently. Not just as an employee, but as someone who brought calm into his home. He noticed how she never complained, even when tired. How she put the child's needs before her own. How she spoke with honesty, never trying to impress. But not everyone saw her that way. The housekeeper began to watch her closely. She whispered to another staff member that people like her could not be trusted. That kindness was often an act, that poor people always wanted more. She felt the change in the air. The smiles became colder, the greetings shorter. Still, she kept her focus on the child. She reminded herself why she was there. One afternoon, the boy fell sick with a fever. She stayed by his side all night, wiping his forehead, whispering comfort. When the man came in early the next morning, he found her asleep in a chair beside the bed. Holding the child's hand, something inside him broke. He realized then that this was no longer just about his child. Her presence had started to change him too. He listened more. He spoke less harshly. He questioned choices he had never questioned before. But with change came fear. He began to wonder why he felt so affected by her. Why her absence during the day bothered him? Why the thought of losing her made his chest feel tight? He told himself it was gratitude. Nothing more. She, on the other hand, felt confused by his sudden attention. The longer conversations, the way he listened when she spoke, the way his eyes softened around his child. She reminded herself of the truth. This was her job. His world was not meant for her. Neither of them knew that quiet doubts. Unspoken feelings and jealous whispers were slowly building towards something that would test them all, and the fragile peace inside that grand house was closer to breaking than either of them realized. By the time the third month arrived, the house had begun to feel like a small world within a world. She knew every corner, every creaking floorboard, every scent that changed when the seasons shifted. The boy had begun to trust her completely. He laughed more often and followed her around like a small shadow. When she entered the room, he would run to her, arms outstretched, knowing he would find comfort and attention. She was patient and careful, never pushing him beyond what he could handle. They played quietly together, built small towers of blocks, and read colorful books. Sometimes she told stories about her life in the city, careful to keep them simple and happy. She did not speak about the hardships, just the small joys: a sunny afternoon, a stray dog that had followed her home, a flower she had found and pressed into a notebook the father watched from a distance. He found himself lingering longer at the doorways, hearing snippets of their conversations. He saw his child's eyes light up in ways they never had before. He realized that this woman, quiet and ordinary in appearance, had brought something extraordinary into their lives. One evening, the man returned earlier than usual. He found them in the garden, the boy trying to balance on a small wooden seesaw while she stood nearby, ready to catch him. He paused, watching without interrupting. She was laughing softly, helping the boy, showing a level of care and attention he had never seen before. Something stirred in him. He wondered why such simple moments felt so powerful, why the sight of her smiling made him pause and take a breath. He had spent his life chasing success, building wealth, and maintaining control. But here he felt a different kind of richness, one that could not be counted in money. As weeks passed, small tensions began to surface. The housekeeper remained suspicious of her. She whispered to the staff, questioning her intentions and spreading doubt. The staff, unsure who to trust, grew quiet, watching from corners and behind doors. But she did not let the whispers affect her. She focused solely on the boy, knowing that her priority was his well-being. The boy grew bolder. He began to share small secrets, thoughts that he had never shared with anyone. Sometimes he would point to a spot in the garden and ask if fairies lived there. She would smile, nod, and invent stories that made his eyes wide with wonder. At night, he would fall asleep faster, clutching a small toy she had given him. Knowing she was nearby, the father noticed the change. He realized that the boy had begun to smile even when he was alone, something he had not seen in years. He found himself thinking about her at unexpected moments, how she spoke, how she moved, the way she seemed to care so completely without expecting anything in return. One rainy afternoon, the boy became ill. She stayed by his side, reading stories softly, bringing him warm drinks, and gently checking his temperature. She barely slept that night, listening to the boy's breathing, adjusting his blanket, and humming softly when he stirred. The father returned early in the morning. Having spent a sleepless night at the office and found her still there, exhausted but calm, he looked at her with a mixture of admiration and something he could not name. He realized she had become indispensable, not just to the boy, but to the house, to the warmth and balance that had been missing for so long. He felt a tug in his chest, a pull towards something unfamiliar, something he had never allowed himself to feel. The following days brought small, subtle changes in the household. The father began to take a more active role in his child's life. He asked her advice on small matters, and while he tried to keep it professional, he found himself lingering, listening more carefully than before. He noticed the small, kind gestures she performed every day, the way she folded the child's clothes, the way she arranged his meals, the way she always had a calm word ready. One evening, while preparing dinner together, she shared a small story about her childhood. The boy listened, eyes wide, while the father, standing nearby, felt a quiet connection forming. He realized that he had been closing himself off for years, focusing solely on work and neglecting the small joys that made life meaningful. Watching her care so completely, he understood that wealth could never replace human warmth and connection. A small moment of crisis occurred. When the boy ran into the street after a butterfly, she rushed after him, heart pounding, catching him just before a car passed. The father arrived moments later, breathless, and realized how deeply he cared. It's not just for the child's safety, but for hers as well. He felt a protective instinct he had never acknowledged before, a desire to keep her close and safe. That night he could not sleep. He walked through the quiet halls, thinking about her. He wondered how someone so ordinary could have such a profound impact on his life. He questioned his own feelings, unsure if they were gratitude, admiration, or something deeper. He had never allowed himself to consider love in this context before. He was a man of control, of wealth, of logic, but here was a force that defied reason. Meanwhile, she remained unaware of the change in his perspective. She focused entirely on the boy, ensuring he was happy, healthy, and safe. She did not seek attention, nor did she notice the subtle glances he offered when he thought she was busy. Her humility and dedication only drew him in more, making the feelings he tried to ignore even stronger. The house grew warmer. Laughter became a regular sound, filling corners that had long been silent. The boy thrived under her care, blossoming in ways no one had anticipated. And while she remained focused on her role, both the boy and his father began to recognize that her presence was transformative. There were moments of doubt, of insecurity, when she wondered if she belonged in such a world. She worried that her background, her simple life, her ordinary nature might never be enough for the man who seemed untouchable in his wealth. But she brushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the immediate needs: the laughter, the stories, the small victories that made each day meaningful. And the father, watching quietly, realized that he was changing too. He was learning patience, empathy, and the value of small, consistent acts of love. He felt the stirrings of something he had never known: vulnerability, and the possibility of opening his heart to someone he had never expected to care for so deeply. The first sparks of understanding, of connection, and of unspoken emotion were beginning to form. The small moments, the quiet laughter, the gentle touches, and the shared responsibilities were weaving a subtle but powerful bond that would soon challenge both of them in ways they could not yet imagine. The fourth month brought new challenges and small victories. Winter was approaching, and the house seemed even more isolated. With cold winds blowing through the garden and gray clouds covering the sky, she had grown used to the routine. The boy now ran to greet her in the mornings with a bright smile that warmed the house more than any heater could. She had become his constant, someone he could trust completely, someone he looked forward to seeing every day. The father continued to notice the changes. The boy was happier, more confident, and less afraid of the world. He laughed and played, exploring the garden and finding joy in small things. The father, observing quietly, began to understand that it was not wealth, toys, or lessons that had brought this change. It was the woman who had shown him patience, love, and gentle care. One evening, a storm rolled in, Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder echoed through the large house. The boy, frightened by the sounds, clung to her, seeking comfort. She held him close, whispering softly, telling him stories of heroes who were brave even in storms. She did not notice the father standing at the doorway, watching silently. He felt something deep inside, a mix of awe, gratitude, and a growing admiration he could not yet define. The storm lasted for hours. She stayed with the boy, reading stories, humming softly, and keeping his fears at bay. When the night finally came, he slept peacefully, and she quietly left his room, exhausted but satisfied. The father met her in the hallway. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice betraying more emotion than he intended. She shook her head. "It's nothing." He was scared. "I just helped him feel safe." He looked at her, seeing not just the caretaker, but someone who had brought warmth and stability to a house that had known little of either. For the first time, he wondered if it was possible for someone like her to belong in his world, not as a servant or employee, but as something more. Days passed, and subtle changes continued. He found himself seeking opportunities to speak with her, asking about small things she noticed about his child, listening intently to her thoughts. The boy, oblivious to the growing tension between the adults, continued to thrive, enjoying the attention and care he had never experienced before. The woman, still unaware of the depth of the father's feelings, focused on her duties. She cooked, cleaned, and spent hours playing, reading, and talking with the boy. She enjoyed the simple moments, the quiet mornings, the shared laughter, and the sense of purpose she felt in helping the child grow. Her life had been hard before, but now it was meaningful in ways she had never imagined. The father began to notice her small acts of kindness toward him as well. She always greeted him with respect, but never with fear or obsequiousness. She spoke clearly and honestly, offering advice when asked, yet never overstepping boundaries. He felt a mix of admiration and something he could not quite name, connection that went beyond gratitude. One afternoon, she discovered a forgotten box of the boy's old toys in the attic. She carefully cleaned them, fixing broken pieces and arranging them neatly. When she presented them to the boy, his eyes lit up with joy. He hugged her tightly, a silent expression of love and trust that spoke louder than words ever could. The father, watching from a distance, felt his chest tighten. He realized that he had never seen anyone care for another human being with such pure intention. The realization was uncomfortable, yet undeniable. He was beginning to feel a bond. It's not just with his child, but with her. However, not all moments were peaceful. The housekeeper continued her quiet resistance, questioning her loyalty and intentions. She whispered to the staff, planting seeds of doubt. The woman, ever focused on her duties, noticed the cold stares but chose to ignore them. She had learned long ago that the right path was often lonely but rewarding. The boy grew more confident in expressing his feelings. He would talk about his day, ask questions, and even share small worries. She listened patiently, offering guidance and comfort. She taught him simple lessons about kindness, honesty, and patience. Lessons that went beyond toys and games. The father began to recognize that these lessons extended to himself. He found himself softening, questioning his own behaviors, and noticing his child's needs with more clarity. He began to engage in small conversations, offering gentle guidance and showing attention he had rarely given before. Turning point came one afternoon when the boy wanted to show her a small drawing he had made. He handed it to her with a shy smile, explaining every detail with excitement. She praised his effort, hugged him, and displayed the drawing prominently in his room. The father observed this simple interaction and realized that the depth of her influence was profound. She was shaping not only the child's present, but also his future, instilling confidence, joy, and a sense of safety. The father began to struggle with his feelings. He tried to rationalize them as respect or gratitude, but he knew deep down it was more. He found himself thinking about her when she was not around, missing the sound of her voice and the gentle presence she brought. He questioned whether someone from her world could ever truly belong in his. But the thought did not diminish the feelings. Meanwhile, she remained unaware of the full extent of his emotions. She focused on her duties and the child's well-being, never considering that her simple acts of kindness could stir something profound in the man who seemed untouchable. The house grew warmer, filled with laughter, stories, and quiet companionship. The child thrived under her care, and the father began to open his heart in ways he had never allowed. The subtle bond between the three was growing stronger, woven through shared experiences, trust, and the quiet understanding that they were becoming a family in ways that went beyond traditional definitions. The first hints of emotional vulnerability emerged in the father's actions. He began leaving small notes for her, asking about the child's day, and showing interest in her thoughts. He found excuses to spend time in her presence, whether to discuss the boy's routine or simply to observe her interactions. Each moment brought clarity and a deeper sense of connection. The woman continued her work, oblivious to the undercurrent of emotion growing around her. She remained focused on her responsibilities, her dedication to the boy unwavering. Yet, she could not help but notice small gestures, extra attention, quiet concern, subtle changes in tone that hinted at the father's feelings. The story of their lives, once separate and lonely, was beginning to intertwine. Each day, each shared experience, and each moment of trust brought them closer, building a foundation for something neither of them had anticipated, but both would soon recognize as inevitable. In this quiet, grand house, surrounded by wealth and comfort, the most valuable lessons were being learned not from money or power, but from kindness, patience, and the slow, steady growth of love. By the 5th month, the house had transformed in ways that were subtle but undeniable. The boy thrived, laughing and playing freely, his fear and timidity replaced by curiosity and joy. The quiet house now hummed with warmth, filled with small moments that mattered, shared stories, laughter echoing down the hallways, and tiny gestures of care that created bonds stronger than words could describe. She'd become more than a caretaker. She was the steady presence that brought balance to a once lonely home. She guided the boy gently, teaching him patience and kindness, while also showing him how to find joy in ordinary moments. And though she did not notice it, the father's attention had shifted in ways he could not ignore. He began to seek her presence more often, not only for the child's sake, but also for his own. The father struggled with his feelings. He had never allowed himself to be so vulnerable. Wealth and control had been his companions for years, and he had believed he needed nothing else. But watching her care for his child, seeing her kindness, her patience, her courage, and the ease with which she brought comfort and laughter, he realized that he had underestimated the power of a gentle heart. One cold evening, the boy insisted on going outside despite the chill. She wrapped him in a warm coat, and they stepped into the garden, where snow had begun to settle softly on the grass. He laughed, running and spinning in the white powder. She joined him, chasing him playfully and making snowballs to toss gently. The father watched from a distance, leaning against the doorway, a strange warmth in his chest. He realized he was enjoying the sight, not because of the boy alone, but because of her. Because of the way she made every ordinary moment feel magical. The housekeeper continued her whispers. But her words no longer held power. The staff had begun to see the genuine affection she showed for the boy, her tireless dedication, and her humility. Even the skeptics could not deny the positive change she had brought. A turning point came when the boy fell ill again, this time more seriously. She stayed up all night, carefully monitoring his temperature, comforting him, and keeping him hydrated. The father arrived at dawn, exhausted from worry. He found her still there, leaning over the child, her eyes tired but attentive. Something inside him broke at the sight. He realized he could no longer ignore his feelings. The depth of her dedication had shown him what truly mattered. And it was not wealth, control, or status. It was love, kindness, and unwavering care. He began to spend more time with them, not out of obligation, but out of desire. He sat quietly while she told stories to the boy, occasionally joining in with a soft word or gesture. He discovered a joy he had not known existed, the simple pleasure of being present. of nurturing and being nurtured, of sharing in small triumphs and gentle laughter. One evening, after the boy had gone to sleep, he found her in the living room. Tidying up the toys scattered from the day's play, he sat down across from her, unsure how to begin. His heart was full, yet his words faltered. "I don't know how to say this," he began, voice low. "I have never felt this way before about anyone." She looked up, surprised, but she did not interrupt. Her eyes were calm, open, and patient. "I've watched how you care for him," he continued. "And not just him, you care about everything small that matters. You've changed this house, this child, and even me. I don't know what I would do without you now." Her heart raced. She had known he cared, but hearing it in his words was different. She realized then that the feelings she had kept buried, the small stirrings of admiration and affection she had tried to ignore, were mutual. "I just try to do what's right," she said softly. "For him, for the boy, I didn't expect anything else." He reached across and took her hand gently, not as a gesture of command or ownership, but of connection and understanding. "Neither did I," he whispered, "but I can't ignore it anymore. I don't want to." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that her simple acts of care had been seen, appreciated, and returned in a way that transcended the ordinary boundaries between them. From that night onward, their bond grew stronger, not in grand gestures or declarations, but in quiet, everyday acts. They laughed together, planned together, and shared moments that strengthened the connection between them. The boy, sensing the subtle change, responded with joy and affection. Embracing the warmth of a home that now felt complete, the father began to see her not only as a caretaker, but as an equal, someone whose presence brought balance, joy, and love. He recognized that wealth and power were meaningless without connection, without someone to share life's small victories and struggles. She had taught him patience, empathy, and the quiet strength that comes from giving selflessly. Months passed, and the house, once quiet and cold, thrived with warmth, laughter, and life. The boy grew more confident, his smiles more frequent, his curiosity boundless. She guided him gently, teaching him lessons about kindness, respect, and empathy, while the father supported them both, learning to open his heart in ways he had never imagined. Eventually, the father could no longer deny the love he felt. It was not sudden or overwhelming, but steady, deep, and undeniable. He spoke to her one evening as they watched the boy sleep peacefully. "I know our lives are different," he began, "but I want you to know that you belong here with him. And with me, if you'll allow it." She looked at him. Understanding and hope reflected in her eyes. "I never expected this," she said softly, "but I do know that this is where I want to be." And so, in a house that had once been cold and lonely, they built a family not defined by blood or wealth, but by love, care, and the small, quiet moments that mattered most. She had been hired to watch a child, but in the process, she had changed a life and, in turn, had been embraced by love she had never imagined possible. The boy laughed the next morning, chasing snowflakes across the garden, with her by his side and him watching, heart full. And in that simple, ordinary moment, they were a family bound by trust, affection, and a love that had grown quietly but would last forever. The days after their quiet confession of feelings unfolded like a gentle breeze carrying a new beginning. The house, which had once been a place of rigid routines and distant silences, now thrummed with laughter, warmth, and a sense of belonging that had been missing for years. She moved through it with a confidence born of both purpose and love. Her bond with the boy had grown unbreakable, and now the connection with his father deepened in ways both subtle and profound every morning. The boy would wake up with a bright smile, eager to share small adventures with her. She prepared breakfast, carefully watching as he ate, ensuring that his health and happiness were always prioritized. The father, who had once considered his home a place of business and transactions, began joining them at the table, sharing conversations he never thought he would enjoy. He listened to the little stories she told, learning not only about the boy's day but also about the small joys she found in the world around her as winter fully set in. Snow blanketed the garden in a soft, white layer. The boy insisted on playing outside, and she bundled him warmly, guiding him through snowball fights, building tiny snowmen, and teaching him how to glide gently over icy patches. The father, initially reluctant to join, eventually stepped into the garden, smiling as he watched the playful interaction. The sight of her laughter mingling with the boys filled him with a warmth he had never known could exist in such a cold, grand house. She noticed how he lingered, how his eyes softened when he observed them together. He had started leaving small notes for her, a reminder about something the boy might enjoy, or a question about her thoughts on the day's schedule. At first she thought nothing of it, simply appreciating his care and attention. But gradually, she understood the depth of his feelings. It was not mere courtesy or gratitude. It was respect, admiration, and affection rolled into one steady, genuine connection. The housekeeper, who had once been her most vocal critic, grew quieter over time. She could no longer deny the positive change brought about by her presence. The staff, observing from corners, began to follow her example. Treating the boy and his surroundings with greater care and attention, her quiet influence had spread through the household, transforming not just the immediate family but the atmosphere and culture of the home. There were challenges, of course. The father struggled with his emotions, unsure how to reconcile his past habits of control with the vulnerability he now felt. She remained patient, offering him understanding without pressing him. Their relationship evolved slowly, built on shared experiences and mutual respect. She was cautious, knowing the fragility of trust and the power of subtle influence. One evening, the boy grew ill again. This time, the illness was more serious, requiring careful monitoring. She stayed awake all night, tending to him, adjusting his blanket, and speaking softly to calm his fears. The father remained by her side, holding her hand, helping quietly, and realizing that their bond had become something essential, something neither could imagine losing. They shared small smiles and whispered words of encouragement, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection that had grown between them. Through this shared experience, the father began to fully recognize her impact not only on his child but on him as well. He understood that her presence had softened his edges, made him more patient, and helped him rediscover the joy of simple moments. He had learned to listen, to observe, and to care in ways he had never practiced before. His love for his child had deepened alongside his growing affection for her. She, meanwhile, found herself reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. She had been hired as a simple caretaker, with no expectation of recognition or reward beyond the boy's well-being. Yet she had transformed the household, nurtured a child, and unwittingly captured the heart of a man who had once believed himself untouchable by emotion. Her humility, empathy, patience had created a ripple effect that changed everyone around her. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The father and she continued to grow closer, each small moment strengthening their bond. They shared meals, discussed the boy's lessons and experiences, took quiet walks through the garden, talking about life beyond the house. They found comfort in each other's company, learning to trust and rely on one another, not only for the boy's sake, but also for their own. Emotional fulfillment. The boy thrived in this environment of warmth and stability. His laughter became more frequent, his curiosity grew, and he blossomed into a confident, joyful child. He sensed the love between the two adults and responded with his own affection, embracing both of them with a sense of security and belonging that had been missing from his early life. One cold, quiet night, they all sat together by the fireplace. Sipping warm drinks, the boy nestled between them, spoke about his day at school, the games he had played, the small victories he had achieved. She listened attentively, offering encouragement and praise. The father chimed in occasionally, his words gentle and supportive. In that moment, the three of them were a family not defined by blood, but by love, trust, and mutual care. The father eventually found the courage to speak openly about his feelings, One evening, as they watched the boy sleep peacefully, he turned to her. "I know our lives are different," he said softly. "I never imagined that someone like you could become so central to our lives. You've brought warmth, joy, and care where it was missing. And I cannot imagine this house or my life without you." She looked at him, eyes glistening with emotion. "I never expected this," she replied gently. "But I do know that I belong here, with him and now with you." They held hands, a quiet acknowledgement of love and commitment. It was not a grand declaration, but a mutual understanding built on months of shared experiences, trust, and care. They had become partners, united not by expectation or obligation, but by choice and affection. The house, once a place of solitude and formality, now resonated with warmth and laughter. The boy's growth and happiness were a testament to her dedication, while the father's emotional transformation reflected the power of love to soften even the hardest of hearts. Together, they had created a home filled with connection, understanding, and genuine affection. She had been hired to watch a child, but she had done far more. She had nurtured a life, healed a heart, and in turn discovered a love that was steady, enduring, and transformative. The story of their lives, once separate and uncertain, had converged into a shared journey of care, joy, and lasting affection in the quiet moments of morning light. With the boy laughing nearby and the father watching them with quiet admiration, she understood that her journey had led her to something extraordinary. It was not the wealth, the grandeur, or the stability she had first noticed when she entered the house. It was the simple, profound power of love, trust, and connection. And in that realization, she knew that she had found a home not only for the boy, but for herself, in hearts that were now intertwined forever.